Welcome to Short Story Theatre. Today's tale is a little different than most of our work. There's no surprise ending, no puzzle, no mystery, and no suspense. Instead, this narrative deals with the age-old question: can you go home again? Our author, Bill Russo, says that he is not actually the boy who lived in the house with no electricity, but admits that much of the yarn is based on his own experiences from long ago in 1949. There were no school buses back then. When he walked to elementary school every morning, he passed by a dilapidated, old dwelling that was spooky, haunting, and set his mind to wondering. Now, here's Matthew with the written results of That Wandering Boy, from the mid-20th century.
Thank you, Felicity. Before we bring on Mark to narrate the tale, the author has asked me to read the foreword that's written in the printed version of the story. It states, "This is a fictional account of the experiences of a boy in the 1940s growing up in the only home in town without electricity. The central character is not me, though I have spent some time in cottages and camps that did not have electrical power. The tale was inspired by a real house not far from the grammar school where I spent grades 1 through 6, from 1949 to 1954, in a seaside town in Massachusetts called Beverly. As I walked to school each morning, I looked carefully for a sign of life. I never saw the occupants of the sad little home, which looks very much like the one that I selected for the cover. It was certain that someone was living in the property, for in cold weather, wood smoke could be seen rising from the chimney. There was no car in the yard, and I never saw people coming or going, or even peering out the window. I wondered what life was like for them. Did they have a child? If so, was his life the way I imagine it in my story? And now, your narrator, Mark."
Thank you, Matthew. That old house stood on an old road, in an ancient New England town. From the sidewalk, if you did not look closely, it looked like all the other houses. It was white with gray trim, 4 rooms in a single story, supported by a foundation of stone and mortar. Though the outward differences were few, a closer inspection would reveal that there were no wires leading to the weathered home. No telephone connection. No shiny strands to illuminate Edison's bulbs, or to warm up the tubes of a radio. In a town bustling with post-war prosperity, everyone except us had electricity. Every living room boasted a radio of some sort. There were Zenith floor model radios for the rich, and RCA sets for most people, and Sears, Silvertone, receivers for those who bought from the wishbook. The trolley tracks running down Main Street were being paved over, because Detroit and Washington made a deal that rails of all sorts were to step aside in favor of the new crop of 1949 automobiles. Chevy made a nice little 6-cylinder car. So did Dodge, Hudson, Packard, and Studebaker, but the flathead V8 from Ford was perhaps the most prized of the year. In the house with no electricity, there was no garage. That was not a problem because the man who owned the house had no car. He walked to his job in the shoe factory. His wife stayed home as she had nowhere to go. And their 9-year-old boy, me, walked to the Hardy School, which was less than a half-mile away. I liked to walk because it helped to get the smell of wood smoke off my clothes. Most modern people heated with coal. It gave lots of warmth and was easy to take care of. On Ash Day every Wednesday, the coal people put their cans out for collection by the city. Except if it was snowing, when they spread the ashes over the sidewalks. We heated our house with a combination of 2 wood-burning units. In the kitchen, at the front of the house, was the stove. It served as the cook stove, but also was a heat source. In the back of the home was a Franklin stove. The middle of the house had 2 bedrooms split by a narrow hallway in the middle. My parents' room was on one side and mine was on the other. In wintertime, we loaded up the 2 stoves and opened the bedroom doors so the heat would flow through all 4 rooms. It worked well and we were warm, but I always smelled of charred embers. By the time I got to school, my walk freshened me, and I didn't smell any different than anyone else. I had friends at school, but no close ones. I didn't want to get so chummy that I would have to have dinner at their house, and they at mine. I didn't want anyone to know that I lived in the house without electricity. I kept up with all the latest radio shows by listening to my classmates during recess and break times when they discussed the exploits of the Lone Ranger or the Shadow. In summertime, I could even hear parts of the great radio series by listening at the open windows of neighbors' houses. Don't get the idea that I felt poor. My mom gave me 5 cents for every recess. That was my favorite time at school. The teacher would bring out 2 huge cardboard boxes, the size of milk crates. In one would be Cheez-Its. We could buy 6 of them for a penny. Nabisco's greatest creation, nuggets, were in the other box. They were round cookies, about the size of a silver dollar, loaded with chocolate bits. For 1 cent, you got 2 nuggets. I always bought a penny's worth of Cheez-Its and a penny's worth of nuggets. A carton of milk for 3 cents completed my snack. For many reasons, I loved school. I relished being able to snap a switch and watch the light bulb instantly burst into brightness, with no stink of kerosene. I cherished the toilets, sitting on them as if they were thrones, even when I didn't have to go. Flushing them and watching the water swirl around the drain was a great treat. There were no toilets in the house without electricity. We had an attached shed, and at the back end of it was a 2-holer. It was just 2 round openings cut in the wood, and you sat down and did your business, while everything plopped to the ground below. Papa put lime on the droppings at regular intervals so the smell wouldn't get too bad. In the wintertime the 2-holer was freezing, so I would try to hold it until I got to school. "Papa," I said one frosty morning, "why can't we have a real bathroom? It's too cold to use the 2-holer. "What are you complaining about?" he said. "In my day, we only had a 1-holer. If 2 people had to go at once, somebody was out of luck. And also back then, our 1-holer was about 200 feet away from the house. How do you like to have something like that in the middle of a blizzard? You should appreciate our fine 2-holer. I should have appreciated our fine well water, too. Except I lost enthusiasm for drinking from the well when I saw Papa, more than once, bring up the bucket, only to have it half filled with water, and the other half with some dead and rotting marmot. I should have appreciated all the fine chicken meals Mama used to make too. She always made tomato sauce with delicious meat in it. "What's the meat in this sauce, Mama?" "It's great. That's chicken, Billy." "I'm glad you like it," Mama answered. Her meals did taste good, but I lost much of my appetite when I found out that chicken was a generic term for whatever Papa gave her to cook. After work, he used to feed the neighborhood pigeons. The birds loved him. He'd spread breadcrumbs around, and they joyously pecked away at them. The pigeons would walk right into his upturned palm to get the best crumbs. And then he closed his fist. The afternoon's pigeon became the evening's chicken. I can only speculate at what other kinds of chicken I've eaten. I like to think that the list is limited to rabbits and squirrels, but I won't bet on it. The 1950s arrived, and so did television. Everybody saved their money so that they could be the first on the block to have one. The next door people got a set, and they told me that I was welcome to look at it anytime I wanted to, by standing outside and peering in through their living room window. I watched fairly often, and they always were kind enough to lift the window a few inches so that I could hear the sound. I enjoyed television, but not as much as radio. Dramatic radio back then, and even now, was a much more fascinating and stimulating experience. If you've ever heard the original War of the Worlds, Sorry Wrong Number, or 3 Skeleton Key on a show called Escape, you might understand. At 16, I left the house without electricity, got a job washing dishes at the Rose restaurant, and rented an apartment with 2 friends. The home was owned by the brother of one of my pals. I had my own room. The house had electricity. It had a real bathroom. I spent many happy moments simply snapping on and off the lights. There was a common TV in the living room, but I hardly watched it. I had my own personal radio in my room. It was 1959. Jack Benny was off the air. He went to television. So did George Burns and Gracie Allen and Milton Berle. But Gunsmoke, with William Conrad as Marshal Matt Dillon, had taken over the radio airwaves, along with yours truly Johnny Dollar. The great adventure shows Escape and Suspense were still on, and so was Lux Radio Theater, presenting radio movies of the best Hollywood films, with the original stars. Life was great. I lived in a house with electricity, light bulbs, a real toilet, and a radio. Now it's over 60 years later, and I still live in a house with electricity. I have a giant flat screen television, internet equipped, and tied into a magic box called Roku. With Roku you can watch nearly any TV show ever produced. You can select from tens of thousands of movies. You can watch films from the silent era right up to the hits of today. There's something else you can do with Roku. You can hear old-time radio shows. You can listen to any radio show broadcast during the Golden Age, or you can even listen to the best of much more recent offerings, like reruns of Car Talk or Prairie Home Companion. Picture this. I turn on my state-of-the-art HD flat-screen TV from 2020 equipped with Roku, Netflix, Crackle, Prime and more, and I tune into the Fred Allen radio show from 1949. I turn out the lights and listen to Fred, walking down Allen's alley talking with Senator Claghorn, and for a few moments it is 1949 again. Listen in for a few seconds as the brash old-time politician brags to Fred about his favorite topic, the South. I'm from the South, son. Claghorn tells Fred. I love the South, son. Why, when I am in New York, I won't even go to Yankee Stadium. And you know, South Carolina? You know what's above it? Upper South Carolina. That's a joke, son. Now as I listen, once again I am living in the house with no electricity. I am still 9 years old. Mama's making sauce with fake chicken. And Papa's chopping and stacking wood. It wasn't much. The house with no electricity. But it was home, and looking back, I realize now how much I loved it. And though really it is true, and you can't go home again, you can go back, for a visit, if only, in your mind.
If only in your mind. Yes, you can go home again. For a visit, if only in your mind. And so closes the short story theatre presentation of The House with No Electricity, by Bill Russo. If you've enjoyed our show, tell somebody about it, and hit the like button, and most of all, come back again real soon. Won't you?